I feel like there's magic in innocence and not knowing what the fuck you're doing. And you're just sort of like tripping your way through. And I feel like people really relate to that. It's authentic, right? And then you're managing to connect to people along the way and they want to see you keep going.
Welcome to Bitch Talk. I'm your host, Erin.
And I'm co-host Ange, aka Captain Party.
And for more than 11 years, the show has celebrated underrepresented voices in pop culture and beyond.
But not in the snore kind of way, which is why our listeners and followers have graciously voted us Best of the Bay, Best Podcast on 48 Hills for 3 years in a row. Three-peat, bitches.
If you like what you hear, follow us on Instagram and check out our website, Bitch Talk Podcast, and rate us wherever you listen to podcasts.
We're begging you to judge us. When does that ever happen? Oh, you're not going to say anything?
Oh, what'd I say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, on that note, on with the show. Clink.
Hey, Bitch Talkers. We are out of Slamdance 2025. We've got our first two films, Coroner to the Stars and 40 Watts from Nowhere. We're kicking off this episode with two documentaries out of LA because this is the first year that Slamdance has done their festival out of LA. So enjoy the episode. All right, Bitch Talkers, we're at Slamdance 2025, and we were talking about the film Coroner to the Stars, which hit home for me a little bit, and we'll get into that later. But I want to have one of the filmmakers introduce themselves and the film.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Heathcote. I am the director, writer, producer, filmmaker behind Coroner to the Stars. Thank you so much for having me on, Ange and Erin. I think it's excellent, the work you all are doing. And yeah, I'm so glad to be here. The film is about Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who is the chief medical examiner coroner of Los Angeles from the 60s through the 80s. He was called the Coroner to the Stars because he performed the autopsies of Marilyn Monroe, Robert Kennedy, Janis Joplin, John Belushi, Sharon Tate, Natalie Wood, among many, many others, and in many cases that were not celebrities, but that is how he earned that nickname. But yeah, he was ultimately demoted for revealing too much information or being too outspoken in the eyes of political figures like the Board of Supervisors and Hollywood elites like Frank Sinatra. So this is his story, his perspective. And I've had the incredible opportunity to travel around with him for over the 10 years that it's taken to make this film and tell his story. So we are premiering here at Slamdance in just a few days here in Los Angeles. Slamdance is in LA for the first time this year, which adds a whole, meta idea on top of what we're doing here. The Coroner to the Stars at the premiere of his own movie, complete with red carpet and all, when he was himself criticized for being somebody who craved the spotlight or attention. So, yeah, I think a fitting conclusion for this story.
Mm-hmm. It is a really impressive feat, this film. You cover so much, and but it doesn't feel like it, like you're on the ride, and it's really fun. But I wanted to find out just how you met Dr. Noguchi in the first place. And did you know about him before? Because I'm ashamed that I didn't. I grew up in LA, and he was around. I mean, it's kind of weird to say, but during the golden age of celebrity deaths. I mean, there were so many mysterious deaths throughout those decades.
Absolutely. No, you're totally right. And, that's certainly something that we can count on, right? As a society, that there will be these sort of tentpole deaths every so often. And there's that old saying that, the deaths come in threes. Well, back in the time of Dr. Noguchi, it certainly seemed more than even the threes with these deaths, and deaths that were, in some cases mysterious, right? Like the death of Natalie Wood, for instance. But my introduction to Dr. Noguchi actually dates back to my childhood. I was born the son of a coroner, medical examiner. So I've always been immersed in this world, if you will, the death investigation world, and seen firsthand what it takes for somebody to be a public servant like Dr. Noguchi, like my father, and just how they are willing to put the truth and the science above anything else. It's a really admirable, selfless position. So when I moved to Los Angeles and I was working in film, a producer of mine introduced this. He found the Coroner, the book, on $1 book rack, and he's like, "Hey, this is pretty interesting. I wonder if Dr. Noguchi is still around." And at that time, he was in his mid 80s, and finally, after not being willing to participate in the multitude of times people had asked him to participate in a documentary project, finally he was ready to tell his story. Little did we know it would be an epic 10-year saga to complete it, but along the way, I met my editor, Keita Adino, who became my co-directing partner. And he has really brought so much to the story and really helped us synthesize it, bring it together. And of course, he brings a very important perspective, being Japanese American himself, which was a huge part of Dr. Noguchi's story that I think really has flown under the radar for so many years. Just people think about these celebrity cases and all that entails, and the conspiracies and whatnot. But this is really our opportunity to tell Dr. Noguchi's story from his childhood in Japan, overcoming the impossible odds that he did to become, at the time in the 60s, the highest ranking Japanese American public official in Los Angeles County at that time. And really to have that whole community behind him and support him through the civil service cases that were and charges that were thrown against him. And, in 1969, he successfully overcame those charges. But then in 1982, he was unsuccessful against the Board of Supervisors and Frank Sinatra, Hollywood elites, who really just wanted him gone.
I was going to say, because he was criticized for being in front of the camera so much, it was to the benefit of this film that he was, and for all the archival footage that you got. Can you talk about digging through the archives and what you used and what you didn't use? Because you mentioned Janis Joplin, and I'm like, oh, where was that story?
I know. Yeah, it was tough. It was also probably my favorite part of the filmmaking process was the time I spent getting to understand Dr. Noguchi's story through reading letters and through reading courtroom transcripts. One of my favorite archival stories was going through the archives of former Los Angeles County Supervisor Kenneth Hahn. And in those archives, I found a letter that was written in 1968 from Mr. George Takei. And he was outraged that the county was coming after Dr. Noguchi. And he expressed that outrage in the letter. And I had no idea that George was involved in this story at all. And then by finding that letter, that encouraged me to get in touch with George. And George was ready to go. He's like, yes, finally, let's talk about Dr. Noguchi. George gained thousands and thousands of signatures and was really at the forefront of JUST, the Japanese United in Search for Truth, in the case against Dr. Noguchi. And really, George, because of his profile at the time, helped garner the support needed for Dr. Noguchi to overcome these trials. So the archives are really magical in that they really created avenues for us that would otherwise have gone on unnoticed. And Dr. Noguchi's personal archives, right, included 8mm film reels that we developed. This is, these ballistic tests that they conducted with, in the case of Robert Kennedy. Some of this footage has never been seen before, and we're really happy to be presenting it to audiences so they can actually see the work Dr. Noguchi did. And also on the archival topic, we are dealing with a profession that is very difficult for people that are not involved in it to see. We're talking about autopsies, dead bodies, and what that process looks like. But it became important for me, I should say, that we don't show that stuff. We can get an understanding of the work and the surprisingly political nature of the job without having to see things that audiences, that aren't going to put audiences off or create images that they won't be able to, get out of their heads. It became very important to me to create something that was dealt with these cases and these deaths and really just humans with dignity.
Mm-hmm. Well, all of that is beside the point anyway. Like, the question was never if he did his job well or not. We know he was very good at his job. That's why he got in trouble. So that part didn't even matter. But I did want to side note George Takei. He's just a national treasure. I looked it up because I was like, how old is he? He seemingly hasn't aged my entire life. He's 87, which is wild. But yes, he's incredible. But I wanted to talk about Dr. Noguchi and his interview. And just his disposition. He seems like such a lovely man. He speaks about all these hardships very matter-of-factly, and it seems like he doesn't even hold a grudge. He just, like, he could teach a lesson on moving on, getting over it and moving on, and just how special it was that you got to sit down with him after all these years.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you have that takeaway. And yes, so many other people in his same position who were ousted, fired for doing exactly what they were hired to do, would have been bitter about it. I think I would have been. I don't know that I could have continued the work that he did. But no, Dr. Noguchi, for him, it has always been about the pursuit of truth and the pushing the boundaries of the forensics and the world of medical, bringing the medical and legal worlds together. He created the National Association of Medical Examiners, the World Association of Medical Law. He is 98 and he has still not retired. He has international travel planned for the remainder of the year, and it truly is remarkable. And to your point about him being so matter of fact, that is 100% true. And that was one of the big challenges with the film, is that Dr. Noguchi is a scientist and he does present himself that way. And it took a very long time to get at what I think was important for this film, is get to the core of the man, to his sense of humor, his personal life, which he does not open up with much at all. And it was really only because we were so persistent and just insisted on going to all of these conventions all over the world and just filming nonstop that we were able to capture some of these moments. There's this moment in the Verite where somebody asks him how his wife is doing, and he then has to tell this person, I'm sorry, but she's no longer with us, and I didn't want to talk about it because every time I do, I start crying. And he didn't want to talk about it. He did not tell his close personal friends that she had passed away. And really, I don't know that we would have captured these moments by sitting down with him and talking about it. It was only through these moments of verite. And that, I think, to me, is sort of at the core of this film. And hopefully what makes it unique is that this man whose career and life was surrounded by these cases of death in which he had to be the public face and answer questions from the media in the spotlight about death, when there were these public figures, couldn't even talk about the death of somebody that impacted him personally. And the contrast there, I think, is, I hope that's the poetry, right? Or that's what I'm hoping for as the filmmaker, that we can look at this contrast, that, you know, we all have these parasocial relationships with celebrities and their deaths, and sure, they're hard on us societally, but the real impact is that of the family members, those closest to them. And we see that with Dr. Noguchi when he loses his wife Hisako, which did occur during the filming of this project.
Oh, well, I'm glad that you brought her up because that's one of my questions about bringing her into the storyline and her effect on his life. Can you talk more about her?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she was really his strength. They met when Dr. Noguchi, shortly after he came to the United States, and he was working nonstop, working into the night, and he worked himself into sickness. And then he had to stay. They thought he might have tuberculosis, so he was sent to the Barlow Sanatorium, and where he stayed for months and months as a patient. And Hisako, his wife, who's actually a doctor, was attending him at that time as a patient, and that's where they fell in love. She on New Year's came and she brought Japanese food to all of the patients that were Japanese American and staying there at the hospital. And yeah, they fell in love, and really she was very quiet and she was very soft spoken, but throughout Dr. Noguchi's career, whenever he faced hardships or nearly lost his job in the first civil case in 1968, she encouraged him to fight. Dr. Noguchi was ready to retire. He was ready to resign. He didn't want to fight, and she said, "If you don't fight, it will set back Japanese Americans going forward in the future. So you have to fight. You don't have a choice." And really, she was the strength. She was, as quiet as she was, she really made a huge impact on his life. And there, of course, is that challenge of bringing a character into a story that is no longer with us, that you can't interview. So it's how do we bring her into the picture and make her a significant character through photos, through archival, and really through the stories and the testimony that others were willing to share, was how we brought that out. And and the film really, I think we sort of begin with Hisako and we sort of end with Hisako, and that was important for me. I know that was also very important for Dr. Noguchi too.
I'm glad you brought up that moment when he brings up his wife, because I can imagine when you filmed that, you were like, oh my God, thank God we have it. It's such an integral moment, and it kind of pieces everything together full circle. But we do have to wrap soon, but I wanted to get into really quickly the Hollywood of it all. And it's funny to hear like Frank Sinatra was at arms. Well, if Frank's mad, we got to fire him. And I was thinking like that can't happen anymore today, right? Because people get called out. Like I was thinking about, remember when Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis like wrote to the judge about that case? Oh God, now I'm blanking on his name. And everybody called them out, like, what, you're going to defend, a convicted rapist or whatever. So like, do you think that could happen today? And like, who would the Hollywood elite even be at this point?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think what makes this story unique is the time itself. Dr. Noguchi was. There will be other people that sit as the chief medical examiner coroner of Los Angeles, but there will never be another coroner to the stars, because at the time that Dr. Noguchi held the seat, it was well before social media exists. It was before we had public information officers. So at the time, Dr. Noguchi had to be that face. The public demanded answers, and he was there to answer them. So now they've created these safeguards where there are public information officers who can basically go and answer these questions. Similar to how we have like a press secretary for the president, right? That didn't exist in the days of Dr. Noguchi. And further to the point of social media and today, the public demands answers immediately. So if somebody dies suddenly, then it's a matter of hours, if not minutes, before that is on X or Twitter or somewhere. TMZ leaked a photo, somebody leaked a photo. And if the public doesn't have answers, they will start to fill in the blanks, right? People who are not experts, people who did not study forensic science and dedicate their lives and career to this. So I really do hope that this film creates a conversation. about the space that we should create for these cases and for these deaths of public figures, the space for the people who have the expertise to do their jobs before we public jump to these conclusions, which are harmful to the families and to these people's reputations.
Yeah, probably making this film over 10 years, you didn't know how timely the conversation around science would be and believing the science. Because I was watching this, I'm like, oh my God, even whenever that was in the 70s, early 80s, he was trying to explain the science of how people possibly died and people were doubting him. So, I did want to say really quickly, because I mentioned in the intro, my uncle, who's first gen Chinese American, born in Chinatown, San Francisco, was a medical examiner in San Francisco.
Wow.
And then I was like, I need to go down the rabbit hole, because he passed away in the mid to late 80s and I was a kid, and now I'm like, I need to do a little research. But thank you so much for this film. It's Coroner to the Stars. We have the director Ben Heathcote, and it's at Slamdance 2025. Thank you so much for this film.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, Slamdance 2025. We are here to talk about a feature documentary that we were very excited to cover. It's called 40 Watts from Nowhere, and we're sitting with the director/star of the documentary, Susan Carpenter. Welcome to Bitch Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, Susan, our audience hasn't seen the film yet, so introduce it to our listeners, please.
Yeah, 40 Watts from Nowhere is the true story of a young woman, me, rewind 30 years, who decided that commercial radio sucked and that I should do it myself. So I got in touch with the pirate radio guru, bought a transmitter kit, built it myself, and started broadcasting from my apartment, starting in the Bay Area.
Anyone who watches the film could tell it seemed like this was done over a long period of time in terms of the interviews, also the archival interviews. But I do want to know why is the time now to screen this film and have people watch it? Because to me, it feels very timely.
I'm happy that you say that. I feel like this is the right time, but the whole history of that vintage footage, I didn't even know that it existed, even though I sat down for an interview. Like back then, I had no memory of that at all. But about 2 years ago, one of the DJs said, "Hey, I've got all this footage. Do you want it?" And so I took a look at it, and I realized that he had captured like the entire arc of the story. And then I just felt like, well, I have to tell this story now. And the reason he was even shooting it back then is because he wanted to make a documentary, and then he just never did. He just put all these tapes in a box and then put them in the garage, and he was about to throw them out, and then he reached out to me. So that's why. Yeah.
Oh my God, what a gold mine. That's incredible. I was thinking that too. I thought it was your, mini DVs or VHS footage because you had the foresight to document it all. That's crazy. The reason why I love this film so much is something I talk about a lot, is like when we were younger, we had to work so hard for everything that we did. Like something as simple as a mixtape took hours and days sometimes if you were recording off the radio. And then if you get the DJ's voice in it, then damn it, I gotta record again. You know what I mean? It's just like in order for you to do this, it took so much effort and work and risk. But now, anyone could just stream live a playlist and DJ set and start having followers. And it's just so easy for people now. But back then, like, we really had to be passionate, and you had to like lay it all on the line in order to get anything done.
Yeah. And I think that's why now is the time, and why you're responding to it the way that you are, and the way that other people who've seen it are responding to it, is like just the effort and the passion to pull off something that is now so easily accessible. Like on some level, it's ridiculous, right? Like, just like, wow, so this is where it all ended. Why did I do that? Right. But I think that when you see just putting in effort, seeing result, and seeing the community from putting in that effort, I think that is a really beautiful thing that people are really resonating with now, because everybody's feeling so disconnected through technology, right?
As a side note, I miss a Radio Shack, and like, wow, and Circuit City, I miss it. But I know you said that it was just kind of a magical thing that at least the interview portion of what was going to be, well, is now a documentary. But what about the other archival footage? Because I loved seeing just the streets of LA in the 90s. And also there's some San Francisco in there. Can you talk about finding all of that and piecing it together?
Yeah. Had I known how difficult that was, would I have done this? I don't know. It is really, really hard to find everything because back then was a time when everybody didn't have a camera in their hand. So it was sort of a process of finding what's available online, getting in touch with those people. Will you let us use this? So that's where some of that San Francisco footage, like Pride from the 90s, so there's that. And then the stuff from down here in Los Angeles came from the community. So there were a lot of people that actually had been documenting certain aspects of the Silver Lake music scene. They were just really happy that somebody was going to do something with the footage because apparently multiple other people have tried to make a movie about Silver Lake in the 90s and it's never happened. So I think they're just happy that this is sort of the vehicle for the footage to finally get out because it really does feel like it was a very special, very hyper creative, super unique individuals just doing what they wanted to do without any financial incentive. And you see that in the footage. And I just think that is super cool and something that you don't really see as widespread as it was back then. I mean, that's just like how we lived, just creating. So that's what I wanted to convey also. And I like that you're responding to that.
Oh yeah, definitely. I wanted to dive into that community because I mean, as soon as you moved to Silver Lake, it was just kind of the perfect storm. You met the right people, all these people were engaged, you were in the hub of creativity at the time. But they became like your roommates. Like you didn't anticipate 24 hours a day having house guests. So can you talk about just the unexpectedness? Like you want to have this pirate radio and it's cool, but there were all sorts of things that you didn't realize were going to come along with it. And did you maintain some of those relationships through the years?
Some, it's one of these things where you have this idea, you make it happen, and you don't really think everything through. Like, what are the ramifications? Like, so I'm just imagining that I've got this radio station. It's me and a couple friends, like sitting in a closet spinning records for a couple hours. It got so popular that you're right. I ended up like having this revolving door of strangers like living with me, like in my house. Like, and the thing about the way that the radio station was set up is the station was at one end of a long hallway, long for a $400 a month apartment. And along that hallway was the bathroom and then my bedroom. So anytime I went to the bathroom, anytime I, took a shower, there were dudes like, and some ladies too, just like down the hallway, like at all hours. But, I think that these people eventually became sort of a surrogate family for me. I think that they were all very protective of me and what we were all doing as a group. And I think that's part of what also made it super special. And that's, when you asked if I've stayed in touch with a lot of these people, I fell out of touch with a lot of these people just because once the station was busted, I was offered a job at the LA Times. And then I was just off in a completely different world. And it was very hard for me to maintain that community that I had built with hundreds of people that were coming into my apartment every week. A handful of them were some of my closest friends, and then reaching out to the people that I needed to talk to just to kind of round out the story, in addition to the interviews that were done back in 1998. Everybody had such warm feelings. It was really nice that I could just like reconnect and everybody just remembered it like it was yesterday. And I hope that that comes through, like in the interviews too, because you're hearing them talking to me behind the camera. It just feels like we both lived through this shared experience, and it was this really amazing singular thing that's never going to happen again.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important to capture this history, and especially while most everyone is alive and can tell the stories and remembers and has the footage or pictures. So I'm so glad you're able to do that. And I want to know, Susan, while you're watching this, because I had this thought too about, Ange and I have been doing this for 12 years. Like, what would you tell yourself back then about this journey, and what kinds of things would you change or would you not change?
Oh my God. Well, I actually, you have a lot of regrets when you get through to a certain point and you look back on the beginning time and you're like, I could have done that so much better. I feel like there's magic in innocence and not knowing what the fuck you're doing. And you're just sort of like tripping your way through. And I feel like people really relate to that, especially if you manage, it's authentic, right? And then you're managing to connect to people along the way and they want to see you keep going. Um, what would I do differently? I think I have more regrets about the filmmaking process because I've never made a movie before and it is self-financed and it kicked my ass. I mean, it is so much more than I thought it could possibly ever be. I thought I was going to do it on a shoestring and I did do it on a shoestring, but a shoestring for a movie is not a shoestring.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be a little bit more careful about where I was putting my resources. I guess that's how I would answer that question. It's less about regrets having to do with the radio station and more about regrets having to do with the making of the movie.
Hmm. Yeah, that's advice for all of us to follow. I wanted to touch on because I really loved. So the first iteration of your pirate radio station was KPBJ, and then the next one is KBLT. So as a lover of sandwiches, I just thank you for that. I love it. But which of the two is your favorite sandwich? I had to know.
Oh, it's definitely the BLT. And
Yes,
you
of
know, you were
course.
proving my point about why I changed the name. It's hard to say PBJ.
Right. You want to say PB and J.
Yeah.
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 But yeah, KPBJ, KBLT. I was like, oh, a woman of my heart. Okay. And then
That's
I just had,
one of yours.
well, BLT, of course, but it has to be a blat. You got to add avocado.
Ah.
Yeah. And I actually put pesto in mine as well. So
Oh,
He's
wow.
fancy, Susan.
that's how I roll.
Fancy.
Sometimes arugula instead of lettuce. But anyways,
Mhm.
I digress. So you had to have a hidden identity for this
Yeah.
radio show because KBLT was the original Fight Club, right? So your identity is Paige Jarrett. Can you explain why that was the name that you chose?
Yeah, Paige Jarrett was a girl that I went to high school with. I mean, my name is Sue Carpenter. That is the most boring name that has ever existed. And so I grew up in a suburb of Chicago. Paige Jarrett is also like the waspiest name on the fucking planet, but I thought it was super cool. So I didn't know this girl very well at all in my high school, but I've always thought that she had a great name. And so being the wasp that I am, I just sort of borrowed it. And that's how everybody knew me, like the entire time that I operated the station. And even today, like when I talk to a lot of the DJs, they still just call me Paige,
Hmm.
sort of like with a wink when they call me Sue, like, okay, Sue.
They don't believe that's your real name now.
Yeah.
um, I did want to, I had a question about if you had to build a radio station again right now, could you, without going online and buying anything?
Could I just like build it from memory? Like, could I just?
And where could you source things online? Like, do you know? Because, maybe we need to pirate some shit. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I hear you there. And a lot of people have been asking, am I going to bring it back? There are ways. I would not know like how to like what all the different components were that I soldered together into this little silver box. But, Stephen Dunifer, the guy that I bought the kit from, he continues to make these kits. He continues to evolve this technology. And so, my son is at 22, he goes to Berkeley, and I was up in Berkeley interviewing Stephen Dunifer for this documentary. And I told my kid about it, and he was like, oh, I think I want a transmitter. And I was like, really? What are you going to do with it? He was like, put it on my shelf. I was like, oh, that is so lame. Like, no, like a transmitter is to broadcast. But, I digress. So, yeah, you can still get these things. Yeah. But Radio Shack doesn't exist, as we both know. And you would have to know like what you needed anyways. I'm sure that there's different things online that would tell you exactly how to do this too.
There still is an underground, you're saying. It's still alive.
It is.
That just goes to show the kids really are the opposite of their parents. See, you're this rebel, you get this transmitter, you take, you climb buildings to put it up or the highest mountain. And your son's like, this is an antique, I'm going to go ahead and put it on the shelf. They won't.
Exactly. Yeah. Mind blowing.
Okay. So I want to know if you listen to radio today and if you have any accepting radio stations in your mind.
I listen to radio the way a lot of people my age listen to the radio, which is when I'm in the car. I don't listen to it when I'm just like sitting in my house. And it's pretty much just to convey information in an efficient way because I work in the news. I don't listen to music radio. I'm like everybody else. I listen to Spotify. I go out and live music. I don't listen to music radio because I continue to find it very disappointing.
Yeah. Same. Well, that's why we have to look to documentaries like this to remind us that one day life was simple and beautiful.
I think so.
Well, it was simple for us to watch it. It wasn't so simple for you. Sorry.
I'm happy that it came across that way. Yes.
Yeah. Are you still riding that motorcycle also?
Yeah, that too. Of course you rode a motorcycle.
I'm like, Sue, you're so cool.
Well, weirdly, like after the radio station, after I started at the LA Times, I started on I rode to work like on a Ducati, right? And then after that, they asked me to be the motorcycle critic. So I was a motorcycle critic for probably 10 or 12 years. I don't ride on a daily basis like I used to. That said, I did just buy a motorcycle for my son that is parked just steps away from here that I rode just a couple days ago. I don't ride regularly, but I do ride occasionally.
So as a critic, you would test out new motorcycles and write reviews? Is that?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, I had a different motorcycle in my driveway every week. So, yeah.
We need follow-up documentaries, Sue. Let's do a part 2, a motorcycle document. That's really interesting.
Motorcycle diaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, think of your alias for that one. Okay. Well, Sue, it's been really fun. We were real excited for this interview. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Again, the documentary is called 40 Watts from Nowhere with Sue Carpenter, aka Paige Jarrett. Hopefully we can see you in real life one day. Next time you visit your son in Berkeley, hit us up, please.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping to get up into a festival in the Bay Area. So if that's the case, I will let you know.
Thanks for joining us on today's show. You can find more information about this episode in our show notes.
If you're missing us, you can visit us at bitchtalkpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter and buy us a cup of coffee.
Did you know we're also on the radio? You can find us at bff.fm.
And lastly, rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. All the cool bitches are doing it.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.fm podcast network. Learn more at podcast.bff.fm.
BFF.fm, best frequencies forever.